Well, it's that time of the year yet again where I make a video on an obscure game mode that no one has heard of before. Except this time around I'm talking about a game mode that is widely known by the TF2 populace. Slender Fortress, one of the older community game modes in TF2, has managed to stay relevant for over a decade because of its pretty simple design. You play on red team and are given a specific amount of time to collect pages, gas cans, keys, whatever the map maker chose. To make this objective a little bit harder, you've got a random boss that'll chase you and kill you if he spots you. With that set in stone, welcome to Slender Fortress. Now, back in the old days where I was a wee little 13-year-old, Slender was a lot more bare bones than what it currently is today. Does that mean that it was better? Well, sort of. It depends on the way you take a look at it. We had less bosses, less maps, less difficulties, so overall you'd think that the experience would be a lot less exciting and a lot more repetitive. And in some aspects, that would be correct. Once you learned how all of the bosses functioned and memorized most of the item spawns on all of the maps, you were pretty much a god. That is, of course, if you played on normal difficulty like a bit. But of course, the game mode never stayed in place. It received numerous updates that added new bosses and new maps. Now, having new bosses added could be a blessing or a curse, all depending on a lot of different variables, such as how many files does the boss require? Does the boss quote-unquote fit in Slender Fortress? And is it any fun to go against? Now, the questions, or rather the lack of them, is what I believe led to my eventual dislike of Slender Fortress as a game mode. In its very early stages, Slender Fortress had very little bosses. You had Slenderman himself, the Weeping Angels, and the Rake. And of course some other ones, but you know, I'm just gonna talk about those main three. Those three bosses demonstrated how much potential the game mode could develop. Slenderman was a look away and run away boss. He couldn't chase after you, but he killed you if you stared at him for too long. The Weeping Angels were the exact opposite of Slenderman. You want to look at them and run away, otherwise you'll be sent back to the era where FNAF was the most popular horror game.
Everybody, my name is Markiplier and welcome to Five Nights at Freddy's, an indie horror game that you guys suggested en masse, and I saw that Yamimash played it and he said it was really good. So I'm very eager to see what is up, and that is a terrifying animatronic bear.
The Rake was a simple chase boss. If it see you, you'd want to run like hell and cut corners to lose the chase. These bosses had very simplistic but memorable designs, so where did it all go so wrong? Well, let's go back to those questions that I've stated earlier. How many files does the boss require? This is probably the least important question to ask nowadays in Slender Fortress, as bosses are divided into different boss packs. However, I still believe that file sizes should be paid attention to. After all, just because the problem is bad doesn't mean it has to get worse. Boss packs kind of serve as a band-aid solution to prevent people from sitting in the loading screen for 2 hours. Depending on whatever boss pack is chosen, you'll only download files from that one. And at the end of the day, you're still gonna download every asset. It's just that it won't take painstakingly long. If we want to talk about file sizes, some of the Slender map files got me tweaking. These people never heard of optimizing. Does the boss quote-unquote fit in Slender Fortress? Now, I don't want to be that guy that says, I only want spooky things in my game mode, but there's definitely a line that you can't cross when designing a boss. I mean, Toho? Seriously? You have all of these creepypastas, all of these horror games, every piece of horror media to be inspired by, and you chose to make a Toho boss. This is definitely the biggest offender for me when it comes to playing Slender. At least keep the bosses somewhat serious. I don't want to pretend to be scared by a magic fairy. Is it any fun to go against? This is more of a balancing issue which can definitely be addressed, but the amount of times that I've died to no fault of my own really just made me want to choke myself out. And there we go, that's all of the things regarding bosses. Now, it's time for me to talk about the things that irk people the most when it comes to Slender. The wait times. No, this isn't about the long wait during the loading screen. This is about the long wait until you actually get to play the game itself. The way that Slender Fortress is currently balanced makes it so that at max, on a big map, only 12 players are allowed to play the game. That is a very big issue since servers allow up to 32 max players to play. What this means is that the other 20 people on the server will have to sit in blue team and do absolutely nothing. Of course, there have been plenty of attempts at trying to alleviate the boredom or having something for blue to do, which I'll get to later. And remember, I said that at max, 12 players are allowed to play the game on a big map. Most maps aren't that big, so they'll resort to the default amount of reds, which happens to be somewhere around 7 players. This leaves an enormously big window of waiting and doing nothing until it's your turn. And once it happens to be your turn, you'll probably die to a boss that you know nothing about.
What is that? I'm hearing some weird noises. Maybe the government wasn't lying about sleep after all. I was starting to hear sounds in my head. Oh my god, what in God's tarnation is that? Oh my god!
I am Adolf Hitler!
Which leads me to my next point. Extreme noob dick kicking. As I've mentioned at the beginning of the video, Slender Fortress has expanded a lot by adding a huge... Son of a bitch. Well, that's what I get for trying to record with an open window. As I've mentioned at the beginning of the video, Slender Fortress has expanded a lot by adding a huge amount of bosses and new maps. Maps are usually never an issue. You can learn the layout in a few rounds and there's that. But bosses on the other hand, oh boy. Remember how I praised Slender Man, the Weeping Angels, and the Rake for having simplistic designs? Well, truth be told, I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with wanting more and more unique bosses to make them all stand out from each other. I think that's great. However, that becomes an issue when you have 10 different boss packs and you only allow the player to play twice or 3 times on the same boss pack. What I'm trying to get at is that new players will never be able to memorize every single boss unless they sink in a massive amount of hours into the game mode. The reason why Slender was so fun to play back in 2014 is because of how easy and simple it was to get into. You have a goal, there's one spooky guy that's gonna stop you from fulfilling that goal, and you already know how he works, so you're evenly matched. But nowadays, whenever I'm in red team, I scratch my head and cluelessly ask on the voice chat about what the scary monster is, just to get detected by it on the other side of the map anyway, and then get brutally slaughtered. What am I trying to get at with this video? I think that Slender Fortress could be a lot better. I'm not making this video just to slander the game mode and call it a day. I mean, most of the things that I'm critiquing in this video are already being dealt with. Kinda. All of those weird Toho and anime bosses, well, they still exist, but thankfully there's not as many of them as there used to be. Still though, they could be removed. The waiting times? You've always had that little arena to fight people in on every map, and map makers started adding parkour sections to their maps. Nowadays, there's maps that have dodgeball in them, and even boss fights. However, I still think there can be a better way to resolve this issue. Why not have 4 copies of the map in one VMF file and then split people into 4 teams of 8 people? Have their own individual timer, page amount, and all of that stuff. Of course, this sounds easier said than done, but I'm just giving out my ideas on how the game mode could be improved for everyone to be able to play. This would also mean that 75% of the maps would be eliminated, but maybe it's for the better. Well, anyway, for my closing statement. Slender is an interesting game mode. I feel like in terms of its development, it rose to the skies and quickly fell down like Hello Neighbor. Pretty weird comparison now that I think about it, but it kind of makes sense in a way. I would love if something was done about the issue of just sitting in blue team and waiting. The majority of the time spent on Slender is just you waiting to actually play the game, and that's no fun.